Here we go. Okay. Chapter 6, the Alter Rebbe has laid out that while we have this great plan for going forward and being close with Hashem, unfortunately, our human animating animal soul has a very different agenda. And he's right there to match us blow for blow, step by step, in every action that we have towards godliness. So, as you recall, and I could put the chart up here again, if that's helpful, we have a couple of indicators because the animal soul, of course, does not introduce itself as the animal soul. And in many ways, the functionality seems similar and almost indistinguishable. But a core a core indicator of something that's coming from the animal soul versus something coming from the godly soul is its point of origin. The godly soul, as we have learned and talked about and remember from previous years, is primarily at home in the intellect. Now, when we say intellect, always reminder that doesn't mean my IQ or even how many pages of the Talmud I've mastered. It is primarily the capacity to imagine that there is something other than myself. So again, the willingness to go outside of myself. And as we have talked about, it is through the intellect that I can import something into my identity. And that's why it's often compared to food. Just like a simple piece of bread exists outside of me, and through eating it, it becomes digested within my very being. Well, in a similar manner, my capacity for intelligence, my capacity to be amazed by something completely new, allows for a whole new idea to be absorbed into my identity and into my character. So, a surefire sign that something is godly is the mind is shaping the heart. So, I think about it and I can at first restrain my impulse and hopefully even shape and massage and mature my impulse so that I am not acting out of impulse, but the mind shapes it. And just to take that one step further, though it's a little bit down the path, we have mentioned, it was just in last week's Parsha, about how Moshe Rabbeinu becomes angry, or at least displays anger. We think, well, you're not supposed to do that. Anger means that your emotions have overtaken. But when the person reaches this level, that their intellect shapes their character, then they can trust their character. So we're not advocating for an elimination of what we loosely call emotion, not in some sort of flighty way, but we might say it sounds a little bit more mature to say passion. We're not advocating to eliminate that. We want to make sure that it is shaped, cured, matured, directed by the intellect. And when a person, just like a skilled craftsman, whether it's a doctor or a carpenter or a plumber, has a certain sense that they have simply developed over years and years of experience. And therefore, the doctor might recommend to go against the standard operating procedure. Because if they're so rigidly attached to the academic, then they look it up in the book and they tell you what to do. When they have developed this type of expertise, so the intellect has shaped their character. They're not saying, "Well, I don't want you to be sick, so I'll tell you it's okay to do it." I mean, that would be acting impulsively. Here, it's the intellect shaping the character. Now, a surefire sign that something is coming from the animating animal, I know we don't like that word, human, whatever word you want, uh, is that it's driven from the heart. And you remember my example, that classic American sort of first day of school thing. What do you want more than anything else in the world? Now go out there and get it. So it sounds very inspiring and uplifting, and it's instilling passion rather than just sort of sitting around being passive. However, what it doesn't take into account is maybe what I want isn't healthy. Maybe what I want isn't good for me. I may want to be a concert pianist, but I don't have a rhythm. I don't have the dexterity. So that's the emotion driving the intellect. So if we simply see humanity as the next step in the evolutionary scale, so we say Well, we are fortunate that we don't have to eat grass because we have intellect and we can therefore cook and make delicious food. But that's the emotion driving the intellect, and we want the intellect to drive the emotion. One of the core points that we're going to be making in this section that we're going to learn today is there really is no such thing as like parav. Everything is either aligning us with Hashem, or by definition, it is disengaging us from Hashem. Even if it's not an active violation, it's just that sense of ignoring godliness. And if I'm ignoring God, I am wasting the opportunity to be close with Hashem. And that itself is a form of rebellion. So I'm going to take this down unless somebody wants me to leave it up, just because maybe it gets distracting. And we're going to be talking about a term that you've probably all encountered in the past. And here the Alter Rebbe really gives us a nuanced understanding of what it means. And that is the phrase Sitra Achra. It's actually Aramaic. And its translation is the other side. Now, in common parlance, that is described as like, the wicked, the dark side. It's got some real drama to it. And one of the points the Alter Rebbe is going to be making in this section we're going to study today is that it's about anything other than Hashem. So, a simple example, if you tell your child to go upstairs and do their homework and you go upstairs and they're playing video games, you say, well, I told you to do your homework. Well, you didn't say not to play video games. Meaning anything other than compliance is a wasted opportunity. And missed opportunities don't come back, as we will hopefully discuss in some detail. So here we go. The Chain Call. So again, it's in chapter 6. I know everyone's got a different publication, the old lessons in Tanya, the new lessons in Tanya, the Rabbi Miller, the Rabbi Steinsaltz, they're all wonderful, but I hope everybody can find the proper spot that we're up to. If you look in the margin, it has the date. That's for the study schedule that we call Chitas. It's the study schedule lesson for the 6th of Teves. This is the one I'm using, which is just the old-fashioned plain Hebrew one. But again, if you got a different volume, you can identify it from the 6th of Teves. That's the study schedule section. Okay. V'chein kol hadiburim, v'chol hamachshavos, asher loy laHashem hema. All words and all thoughts that are not for Hashem. Now, we recognize this pattern. We talk about, the Alter Rebbe taught us about what we call the 3 garments. Just a quick reminder, we have 2 forces within us. That which is the human animating animal soul that begins with the premise that I'm here. And now I look around and see what will enrich my life. And the metric by which the animating human animal soul determines a behavior or a thought or a word is this going to make my life better? But it begins with that premise. In contrast to the godly soul, which begins with the premise, and the premise is this in the service of Hashem? Is this in the service of Hashem? Now, each of these 2 forces, these 2 powers, these 2 impulses are fighting over control, each seeking absolute control of the 3 garments. And they're called garments because, like a garment, you can put it on, but you can also take it off. So just because you're in control of it now doesn't mean that it is protected. There's a word I'm looking for that I can't think of, impervious to being snatched away by the enemy. And that is what I consciously think about, and we'll nuance that out in some later chapters. Not what passes through my field of vision, but what I willfully think about, machshava, the root of that being chashuv, something that I give significance to, what I say and what I do. Now, another core indicator of something coming from the godly soul versus coming from the animal soul is something that comes from the animal soul starts in thought, speech, action. Just like a human being is erect, mind, mouth, behavior, think it, say it, do it. The animating human animal soul begins with the action. He's not so interested in the idea and the conceptual as he is in the action, spoken word, and thought. So here, when the Alter Rebbe is laying out not evil behavior, because again, the Alter Rebbe did not have to write Tanya to teach us not to do Averas. We got libraries that teach us that. The Alter Rebbe here is talking about, again, how we overcome the struggle between not just what we do and what we say and what we think, but how we align ourselves. What are we aligned with? So this is an example where the Alter Rebbe says that the spoken word and the thoughts, so the word comes before thought. So when word comes before thought, just like, we always tell everybody, engage mind before opening mouth, but when the mouth comes before the thought, that is again an indicator that it's coming from the animating, self-serving soul, the animal soul. That is not for Hashem. Now, again, it doesn't mean that it's evil. It's not lying and so on. For that, we don't need to have Tanya. That we got, like I said, all the books of halacha tell us you're not allowed to lie and slander, etc. But here, it's not exclusively for the service of Hashem. Now, wouldn't it be nice and simple if we could say, okay, so then as long as what I'm saying is a word from the Chumash, it's good. And if I'm saying something that's a word from the daily news, that makes it bad. If it only would be so simple. Because a person could be using Torah for mockery, or they could be using Torah for self-aggrandizement, because it's interesting. Now, again, that's better than studying science or math, but the Alter Rebbe did not write Tanya for, well, it's better than nothing. That our objective in life is not, well, what's the least amount I got to do and I won't get yelled at. Our objective is to have a vibrant, meaningful relationship with Hashem. And it could be that a person could be talking about, and as we'll learn later on, not in this chapter, like Rabbah, who began every class with a joke, literally a joke, because it loosened up his students and they felt more relaxed and they felt more comfortable, and therefore they were able to study better. So one guy's reading the newspaper and another guy's reading the Talmud. Which one is serving Hashem? Well, it's a bit of a trick question. Because if the guy's studying the Talmud because he's trying to figure out some way to mock it, then it's the intent. And that's what we're about here, the intention. We got all kinds of books that tell you what to do and what not to do. But what is the intent? What is the neshama behind this behavior? So as the Alter Rebbe says, anything that is not for Hashem, it's not because it is, quote, bad. And to be aligned with the will of Hashem, and the service of Hashem. Shezehu perish loshen sitra achra, perish tzad acher, she'ena tzad hakadusha. That is called sitra achra. Now, in common parlance, sitra achra is aligned with like horror and evil and averas and idolatry and terrible things. But here, the Alter Rebbe is really drilling down on a very literal interpretation. It's anything other than alignment with Hashem. So if we think about this, even in our own life experience, hopefully not, the person can have an experience where somebody is mistreating in the most subtle of ways. They're asking you questions, not because they want to know you, because they want to somehow figure something out, or they're not really paying attention to you. We're easily distracted by the phone, by whatever it might be, when we're not really focused on the person. I mean, the overly simplistic illustration is no one wants a root canal and the guy's on the phone because he's not fully attentive. Or the guy, you go to the dentist and he says, oh, good, I've been wanting to do some root canals. And what do you know? You need a root canal. Now, I may in fact need the root canal, but why is it off-putting? Because he's not thinking about me as the patient. He's thinking about himself. Well, when I am even if I am, and again, could be doing a mitzvah. We're not talking here about doing bad things. Like I said, for that, we got other books. But I'm not doing it with an awareness of Hashem. I'm doing it with an awareness of myself. That means for some other reason, sitra achra, other reason. Doesn't mean a bad reason, doesn't mean evil, doesn't mean plotting. And again, the Alter Rebbe did not write Tanya for, well, it's better than nothing. And again, as I often do, I go down these rabbit holes. Feel free to get the shepherd's crook out and yank me back onto task. But one thing that I have observed, sort of speak in my career, is that one of the difficult things about Torah and mitzvahs is not just that people don't want to give up their taivas. Everybody has their things. I like to sleep late and go to Red Lobster, whatever it is. But it's this awareness, which is really very antithetical to essentially the forms of capitalism. Now, as the Rebbe points out, again, that capitalism is an excellent way for making a living, but it's not a way to make a life. And that's the what we might call the art of it. That we, in a society that doesn't have any other form of direction, so then capitalism becomes our form of direction. And we forget that that's the way that you make a living. That's the way you may even create great works and do wonderful things and make Amazon, which I'm real glad they do. But it's not a way to make a life. But when you don't have any other way, we start to think, as the song goes, when you're rich, you really know. Because we forget that it's litzad acher, it's sitra acher, it's for some other objective. It doesn't mean it's an evil objective. I mean, it's bad in the classic sense, but it's not awareness of Hashem. What is the sign of awareness of Hashem? B'tzad ha'kedusha einu el hashra v'hamshacha mikedushasa shel Kadosh Baruch Hu. Kedusha means that it's a place where Hashem dwells. The old joke, as a story told, maybe it's even true, that somebody once asked the Mittler Rebbe when he was a young boy, where is I'll give you a quote if you show me where Hashem is, and he says, I'll give you $1 or whatever it was if you show me where he is not, whatever the facts of the story. But the point being, where is Hashem? Wherever you let him in, but only when you let him in. Hashem doesn't impose himself. So where is Hashem? In the place of Kedusha. So again, at a very simple level, overly simplified, but one that we can probably all relate to. Where does a person feel comfortable? Where they are invited. And if you have to sort of impose yourself like you're a nuisance, well, you don't feel very welcome because you have imposed yourself. Where is Hashem? Not where I decide he is. Well, I decided that it's a good thing to do. Now, again, in Torah and in Halacha, as an example, we find this sort of ironic character trait. And you see this not only in Halacha, but in all of Torah. We do something in a way of Torah study, which we certainly encourage, although, as we'll explore, on the surface, it seems like a rather odd practice, which is we suggest that we have a better way of writing Torah than Hashem. Meaning, you recognize this idea. We learn a pasuk, we learn something, you say, why does it say that? Why doesn't it say this? Now, ultimately, of course, we begin with the premise that the way it is the way it's supposed to be. And therefore, if I think I have a better idea, I have to explore why my idea is not better. But the mere premise that I should suggest that I, quote unquote, have a better idea seems so radically chutzpah as to not be tolerated. Not only is it tolerated, it's encouraged. That's how we developed Torah thoughts and so on. Again, always remembering the premise. I bring this up because this is what we're saying. Where is Hashem welcome? What is not sitrach, or what is the, quote, proper side? That's where godliness dwells. And godliness dwells if we begin with the premise that this is about serving Hashem. And as we know, Torah isn't always about conforming to Western analytical theory or jurisprudence or Newtonian physics or geometry or whatever it might be. So if we begin with the premise that I'm here and what can God do for me and how can God and Torah and mitzvahs enrich my life, which we would make that argument, we think we can win that argument, but that's not the argument. Because then it's all about what can Hashem do to serve me. And we want to be the attitude, what can we do to bring godliness into the world? So again, the basic distinction between the premise of the self-serving, animating human animal soul is this good for me? The basic premise of the godly transcendent soul is, does this fulfill the purpose of Hashem? Does this make godliness welcome in the world. And what can happen is we forget that we work for God, and we start to think that we're here to do for ourselves. And if we're here to do for ourselves, then I become the determinant about whether or not I like that. Now, what makes Hashem welcome? Bein b'poel mamish kemalachim al yenim, bein b'koyach kekol ish Yisrael lamata, shebekoycha Eliyah is botol mamish lagabi Kadosh Baruch Hu mesiras nafshay akudushasay Hashem, akudushas Hashem. Here, the Alter Rebbe introduces a phrase which we are going to revisit from time and time again, and we'll talk about it now, because the more we can sort of drill down on it and really get the understanding of it, the more we can make it understood as it's going to be raised time and time again. There is a sort of scholastic theory that you go to the ultimate extreme, and if the theory holds to the ultimate extreme, then it's a valid theory. We drill down on this a lot in Torah because we are pretty obsessed with this thing called truth. And I don't mean that to be sarcastic or even dismissive, because it is accurate that there are circumstantial truths, whether it's what temperature water boils at, whether you're at sea level or at mountains. And this is not just a sort of linguistic game that we're playing, because we can become so obsessed with truth that we forget the idea that, well, if I can't, or we get led into the pattern of, well, if I can't be perfect, I might as well give up. But the ultimate essence, the ultimate truth point, the ultimate extreme, I think it's called reductus ad extremis or something like that, when we get a concept and we plug it all the way down to the end, is what happens if we get into a match between the survival of my physical self or the survival of my spiritual self. That is the ultimate illustration. And that is the platform that we are familiar with from the great heroes of our history, called Mesiras Nefesh, the surrender of self. So again, we have these two forces that are in competition. Often they can get along. I mean, this is the story of our history. It's the story of Hanukkah. You know, we got along pretty well with the Greeks for a while. It's the story of Purim. We got along with Achashverosh pretty well for a while. We got along in Egypt for a while pretty good with Yosef and so on. And most of the time, our Gashmias and our Ruchnias, our spiritual and our physical, can get along pretty good. But every once in a while, there's a showdown. There's a face-off between them. Now, historically, and may we never be brought to such a test, some of our greatest of great heroes, in fact, had that kind of ultimate showdown where they put the sword to them and they said, bow down or we will execute you. And that they went to the great acts of Mesiras Nefesh. Why? Because we have to determine what is the ultimate driving force. Is it my spiritual or is it my physical? Now, hopefully, we never have that type of stark encounter. Although, and again, I'm not advocating for it, at least in that circumstance, it's very clear and obvious. I once was speaking with somebody who, again, sometimes people over-exaggerate and oversimplify, as was the case here, but they were going through a financial rough patch, and they said, look, I'm either going to have to sell my house and move into a smaller house, or I'm going to have to take my kids out of day school. So I said, well, you're very fortunate. You now have a very clear opportunity to illustrate what is most important. You're living in a house you can't afford, and you're sending your kids to yeshiva that you can't afford. You're going to have to make it now. In fact, you didn't have to make a choice, and people finagle and this and credit cards, and they get it done. But in a sense, right? But most of life is not that stark. So whether they say, "Hey, let's sit with the cool kids and ignore the weird kids," and if I say, "Well, I'm going to go talk to those kids," well, then we're not going to play with you. So that's a social Mesiras Nefesh. And again, it doesn't present itself in such stark moments. It startles you out of your sleep in that instantaneous moment. So we can all imagine, the great heroism that we would embark upon were we called in that moment, but we don't always recognize it. And essentially, this is what the Alter Rebbe is saying, that at every moment, this is exactly what we are called upon. This stark reality, where in every moment we have to make a conscious decision. Am I aligned with the infinity of Hashem, or am I aligned with my self-serving interest? Now, again, most of the time, the two get along, Yes, once in a while you have to pay more for the Chol of Yisrael chocolate yogurt, but you can get it. And if you have to bypass something, okay, that is a moment. But this is essentially what it's about. This form of Mesiras Nefesh, which isn't only in the great dramas like we described, it's in these subtle moments, which the fulcrum that it spins on is, what is the determinant in my life? Do I say, what can God do for me? That godliness gives me meaning and joy, which I'm all for it. I'm not against it. Or do I say, I am here to be in the service of Hashem? If it's about what God will do for me, and then they say, well, God is allegiance to God is going to forfeit your identity. And again, easy to point at other people. This is what happened. People said, well, with a name like Epstein, I couldn't make it there, so I changed my name to Smith so I could make it in the world. So then I decided that's what's important to me. I said, the Seder is important, but I got tickets to the football game or whatever. So then these are those moments when we can make these choices. This is the Mesiras Nefesh opportunity. Again, not just in the drama, and even in the actual mitzvah. Even when I'm doing it, am I doing it because it enriches my life, or am I doing it because I'm in the service of Hashem? Yeah, we got a hand raised.
Yes. Hi, Rabbi. Thank you. So I changed my name example you just gave. You change it to Smith, you can make a lot more money, whatever, you get business opportunities that may not have been available to you, and you give a lot more money to your synagogue and to charity, and you do all kinds of good things with that money. Was it bad to change your name? Because it sounded
well, again, changing your name isn't innately a problem. The problem is, am I trying to hide my Jewish identity? Am I saying that what's more important to me is that I have better Gashmias instead of Ruchnis? So again, it's not specifically about that. Life would be a lot simpler if we could all come up with a list of all the activities that we have to do and don't do. And here we're talking about what is the mission? What is the kavanah? What is the intent? Am I saying I changed my name from Shmivelovitz to Smith because it was too hard for people to pronounce, or I said because I didn't want them to know that I'm Jewish, because I wanted to hide it, because it wasn't something that I wanted to make known. So again, we're not here to debate whether or not changing your name is a value or not a value. We're saying, what is it that drives my behavior? That's what the question becomes. What is it that drives my behavior? And again, just on that note, they know. The guy who doesn't like you, he knows. You think he doesn't know because you changed your name to Smith? He knows. Okay. So here the Alter Rebbe makes this point, that where is Hashem? Wherever you let him in. But you only can let him in through total bittul. And again, total bittul, it's a hard word to translate because the concept doesn't exist in a secular language. It's a holy concept. So it's everything from self-resignation to humility. The closest analogy that I can think of, it's like a soldier. On the one hand, a soldier has to be fully participatory. He doesn't just sit there and say, well, tell me what to do, otherwise I'll sit here. At the same time, he has to remember that this isn't up to him. This isn't his. He is the minister of what has been entrusted to him. So bittul is not about sitting there with my hands folded and saying, I'm so humble, I'm so humble, I'm so humble. I took out an ad in the newspaper to tell everyone how humble I am. Bittul means that I don't take myself seriously, but I take what I do tremendously seriously. I am the minister of that which has been entrusted to me. So where is Hashem welcome? Where we let him in. That's it. The total bittul is what lets Hashem in. Otherwise, I'm pursuing something of my own. And now, how does this manifest itself? So the most profound illustration would be in what we translate as angels. Now, this is a little bit more of a technical point, but we use the word angels, but there are really various stages. To go from the infinity of Hashem to the finity of creation, it's like a spectrum, right? It doesn't go white to black instantaneously. It goes in a very subtle sense. And that subtlety starts to take on somewhat of its own, at least apparently, own identity. And that's what these spiritual entities are, these malachim. And even Rambam talks about this halachically. When I say even Rambam, I mean it even manifests itself, and you recognize this from the davening, where we talk about srafim, those that are completely on fire, ofanim, chayes hakodesh, these different terms that are descriptive. They are absolutely surrendered to Hashem. The analogy we often use is like a tool. I don't say the hammer hit me, I say he hit me with the hammer. The hammer doesn't have any identity. It is completely surrendered to the carpenter. Now, a Jew has this capacity. He has this ability. And again, a Gentile doesn't have this ability, so they don't have this expectation. So, as the Alter Rebbe lays it out, even a Jew's intuitive sense is for kindness and so on. So if he's kind, well, what did he do? That's how you made him. He's got to bring some conscious godliness to it. The Gentile, who is the highest form of creation, is still primarily concerned with self. A Jew is probably also, but he has the capacity to do it. And when he touches on that Mesiras Nefesh. Now, again, like my friend says, the Lubavitch commercial, they can't help themselves. They got to throw in how Lubavitch does it. So this is sort of the Rebbe's message. Everyone, I imagine people are familiar. When the previous Rebbe came to America to resettle in 1940, the war is raging. He was physically compromised. And people said to him, not mean people, people said, Rebbe, it's not going to work in America. America is a different place. You're not going to have Hasidus. Now, these weren't mean people who said, oh, here's a rabbi who's been tortured. Let's go make him feel bad. They were trying to be nice. They were nice people. People say this, tell your kid they don't have to have so many kids. They're not mean. Why? Because they loved him. They wanted him to feel comfortable and say, look, Rebbe, we'll give you a shul. You'll live out your life. But don't get your hopes up. We don't want you to be disappointed. Now, in 1940, that seemed like the smart thing. Who you betting on? This one rabbi in a wheelchair or the Soviet Union and Shopping Mall America? That's where I'm betting. The Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, who embodied literal Mesiras Nefesh, literally, his own torture and torment and so forth, and his Hasidim, etc. And then our Rebbe came and said, you will see American youth, this Western youth that everyone has given up on, that are only consumed with bourgeois success, will be prompted and driven by Mesiras Nefesh. Saying, Rabbi, forget it. All America wants is a chicken in every pot, 2 cars in a 3-car garage. I mean, again, that's not an unreasonable reading of the culture. And the Rebbe's message is, no, you'll see they will respond to the call for Mesiras Nefesh. One of the things that the Rebbe often pointed to was, look at the Peace Corps, whatever the Peace Corps is today. Here you have, spoiled American couch potatoes giving up suburbia to go to some place that you can't even find on a map in Botswana, to treat people who they'll never get anything from. Those people aren't going to make them rich, and you'll see they're driven to do it. So rather than Mesiras Nefesh being some sort of antiquated heroism, the Rebbe's message is, you will see that American youth will respond to the call for Mesiras Nefesh, not just to, sitting on the couch and TV dinners type of thing. And you say, well, I know someone who doesn't. Right, that's not the Chiddush. It's not surprising that some people don't. What is shocking is, here we are 75 years later, since the previous Rebbe passed, and the Rebbe brought this message to a whole new level, and you'd think this is going to go away, right? That's what the smart people said, not unsmart people and not unnice people. These were people who saw America and said, forget it, this is it. America is going to be consumed by materialism and greed. And this is that point that you will see that people are driven by Mesiras Nefesh. And this is the capacity that exists within us. And if you don't believe me, go stand on the street corners and ask them. And this is what we did. We said, excuse me, are you Jewish? Yes. Do you want to put on tefillin? Now, you would think nobody is going to do this. This is New York. People step over dead bodies. No one's going to do this. Zero. So I know someone and he stood out there for an hour and he got 0 people. That's not startling. What's startling is you got anybody, and it's not 1, it's not 50. Why? Because are you Jewish means you have this love. There's nothing in it. You're not going to get rich. You're going to be late for your next appointment. You may even feel funny to tell your friends that you did it, but you're going to do it. Why? Because of Mesiras Nefesh. And this is the thing that our enemies never understand. Haman doesn't understand it. He says, we got them. They're sleeping. They're spread out. They're not from. We got them. We got them. They're not from. We got them. But what he doesn't understand is that the Jews respond with Mesiras Nefesh. Not to embarrass anybody, we have someone here. Don't you know there's a war in Israel? What are you moving to Israel for? You see people moving back to Ukraine? They're like, oh, boy, am I glad I'm here, right? This is not a reasonable thing. This is the Mesiras Nefesh that is driven by the neshama, not because I figured it out and so on. Why? Because this is what's driven out. Okay, I'm off my soapbox. Therefore, we say, even if one person sits and learns Torah, the divine presence is there. Why is the divine presence there? Because I've let him in. Why am I studying Torah? Because it's so interesting. I can read history. Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn is more interesting. I could read up on the news and so on. But why? Because I've welcomed Hashem. And if I have 10 people, the fact that I could get 10 people together means that the Shekhinah is there. This is associated with, though it's not exclusively, halachically, with the whole concept of a minyan. But what if something is not welcoming of Hashem? What if I'm there and I say, well, I like it, it's interesting. What about God? Okay, I'm not against it. I mean, we're not talking about someone who's being chutzpah and rejecting God. I'm here, I'm doing my thing. It's interesting to me. So why should I imagine that it's so godly? Look, when a mother makes dinner for her family, she's showing love. I go to the restaurant, he makes the same dinner. Maybe it's even better. But he's driven by a monetary objective. It's not a bad thing, right? This wording. Okay. I don't know. The restaurateur, what is his objective? He wants to get paid. What is the objective of the mother who makes dinner? Because she wants to nurture her family. It's the same action, but what is driving it? And again, that's what is the gift of Tanya. We know all the laws: stand up, sit down, lean to the left, don't lean to the left. That we know. But anything that is not there in the because it wants to be aligned with the infinity of Hashem. So why should I imagine that God is aligning with me? Again, we often make this mistake. We think that the salesman really loves me. And again, I'm not criticizing him. He's a salesman. That's what he does. He sells cars. I shouldn't expect him to be my friend. So we have this misplaced sense of identity. So how then does it exist? Meaning if Hashem is not immediately welcome, how does it even? I don't know what's going on with that. Why? Because it's not welcoming of the infinity of Hashem. But what is it then? It's coming, and this is another core vocabulary word, from the back. It's coming from the back. So this is an image that the Alter Rebbe is going to reference again and again. When I give a gift to somebody, I give it with my full enthusiasm. I look them in the eye, and I give it to them. When I give something to somebody out of obligation, I mean, to use an analogy, when I pay my taxes, I recognize its importance, it's necessary, but I don't do it enthusiastically. So how much do I give? As little as possible. And I give it, I'm not with a smile. I give it, the analogy is over the back. I sort of discard it. There it is. Okay, fine. I have to. I sort of hold my breath and I give it over the back. That's the image. In fact, we're told him, a grumpy face, they forfeit the whole mitzvah. You say, why they forfeit? Okay, it's not the highest. Why is it that if I put up a mezuzah with a grumpy face, that's beautiful, but I still did the mitzvah? Why is it with tzedakah I forfeited the whole mitzvah? Because the recipient has been dehumanized. So the whole point is to uplift the person, and now I've just degraded the person. Okay, so our question is, since Hashem, quote, only resides where he's welcome, so how does anything that's not welcoming of Hashem have its existence? Isn't it being in rebellion against the infinity of Hashem? So how could it even exist? Well, the answer is Hashem gives it, but he gives it over the back, dismissively. I understand I need to. I need to pay taxes for all the different reasons. I need to stop at red lights. But it's not where my passion is. It's not where my focus is. It's not where my face is. I'm not looking you in the eye. I'm doing it in the sort of dismissive that it has some glimmer that manifests, that makes its way down to become invested within this type of existence and character. It's been compressed and compressed and compressed. So again, if you think about my understanding of my example of paying taxes, I recognize it's important. I recognize I have to do it. I don't like it. It's not where my pleasure is. It's a bit of a begrudging, and I'm grumpy about it. But I do it because I recognize its necessity. Well, and again, we're using a human analogy for Hashem. Hashem, so to speak, recognizes that if everything only existed because it was in total surrender to Hashem, then there would be no alignment with Hashem, because of course I won't exist anymore, and then I can force you to be my friend. You have to welcome me. You have to take me in. So that's not a genuine alignment. If somebody bullies